Welcome back. Now that you've mastered crocheting in rows, we're going to move on to how to crochet in the round, which is using the same basic stitches, but it becomes really useful to crochet in the round to make things like hats, baskets, sweaters, and cowls. We're going to start by learning a little bit about the anatomy of crochet in the round. So here I have a little swatch made in half double crochet. As you can see, it's nice and round, kind of like a coaster. The way I made this swatch was by starting from the center and working out. And I'm going to go over 3 of the most common ways to begin crocheting in the round from the center. And this is where we get into some math that goes beyond counting. So when we were working in rows, we talked about how important it is to count your stitches, simply because that helps you keep track and make sure that you have the right number of stitches in every row so that your edges are even and you're good to go. Crocheting in the round, however, some physics become involved here because we need to increase the number of stitches in each round in order for the crocheted fabric to lay flat. I'm going to switch over here to a swatch made in double crochet because you can really see the circles of stitches in this swatch. I started from the very center by making a ring, and into the ring I worked this first round of double crochet stitches. Then when it was time to start working into the stitches to make the second round, I had to increase evenly around to keep this swatch flat. And in every subsequent round, you increase to keep the swatch flat. Now you could stop increasing and get something that looks like a basket or a bowl or a hat. What I did here was I made my first round, I increased in my second round, and then I stopped increasing and worked even. And that's the terminology you'll encounter in crochet patterns. When you're changing the number of stitches in a round or a row, and then you're told to work even means stop changing the number of stitches. So I worked the first round, second round I increased, then I worked even, and my stitches cupped up into this round thing. So we're going to focus on crocheting in the round flat. And really the only new technique, other than learning how to begin crocheting in the round, the only new technique we're going to cover in this section is how to increase. Increasing stitches comes in handy not only when crocheting in the round, but also when you want to increase for any real reason, like if you take a look at this scarf over here, see how it looks ruffly? I achieved these ruffles by increasing too much along this edge. That's also a diagnostic tool for you. If you're trying to crochet something flat and it ends up ruffling around the edges, it means you're increasing too much. So keep that in mind as you work. Or start experimenting by crocheting something flat with a ruffled edge by simply increasing too much. Now I'm getting ahead of ourselves. I haven't even taught you how to increase yet, but it's really quite simple. First, let's start by how to begin crocheting in the round from the center out. Later in the lesson, I'll teach you how to crochet either from the center in or starting with a larger ring. But for right now, we'll begin by crocheting from the center out. This is a very common way to begin crocheting hats and things like amigurumi dolls that are really cute. Even hacky sacks that are crocheted beginning from the center out, and then you stop increasing, you create half this sphere, then you decrease back down to complete the circle, and we'll cover decreasing in a later lesson. The first way that I'll show you how to begin crocheting in the round is the same way we'll use when we learn how to make a granny square in a later lesson. To begin crocheting in the round for a granny square, or really any other kind of project, begin with a slip knot on your hook, and then make a chain. And you'll be instructed in the pattern that you're following about how many chains to make. But generally speaking, you want to make a couple fewer chains than you'll have stitches in your first round. Okay? So in this swatch that I showed you here in double crochet, the first round of stitches has 8 double crochets in it. And I began with 6 chains. Okay, so you want to have fewer chains in the beginning by a couple. And you'll get a feel for this as you go. But I'll begin here with 6 chains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, unlike working in rows, we are not going to use this as a foundation chain to build our stitches into. We're going to use a slip stitch to join the hook end of this chain to the slip knot end of the chain to form a ring. To do that, I'm going to loop this first chain over to my hook, insert my hook into the chain stitch, pull a loop through, and I'm kind of having to wiggle it there because that's the slip knot end. It got a little tight. And then to pull the yarn through the stitch too. Remember, that's how you make a slip stitch. You pull the yarn through the stitch and the loop on your hook. I'm going to do that again just to make things clear. Okay, I have my chain. I insert the hook in the very first chain and draw the yarn through the chain and through the loop on my hook. Okay, now let's take a closer look at what we've made here. This is a ring. Here's the live stitch at the very end, but you can clearly see that there's a center of the ring. Okay? When we make the first round of stitches, we're instructed, usually by a pattern, to make our stitches into the center of the ring. Since we're working in double crochet in this example, I will chain 1, because even though we won't be turning our work when we're making crochet in the round, usually we don't turn our work, and you'll see how that's possible as we move on. We have to start with the turning chain anyway because we still have to make up for the height of the crochet stitch. So I chained 1 for single crochet, and then to make my first single crochet of the round, I insert my hook through the center of the ring, right into the center of the hole right there. Yarn over, pull up a loop. Okay, regular crochet stitches. There's nothing different about how we're making these single crochets. That's the first stitch of the round. Then I'll make all of the rest of my stitches by inserting my hook through the center of the ring, pulling up a loop, and drawing my yarn through both loops. And I'll continue making single crochets in this manner. Okay, and that is how you begin crocheting the round with a chain. The nice thing about this, one of the features of beginning to crochet in the round this way, is that that hole in the center remains. When we make granny squares in a later lesson, you'll see because one of the major aspects of a granny square is all of the negative space in it, having a hole at the very center is important to keeping that consistent look. Okay, now I'm going to show you another fairly common way to begin crocheting in the round. It is not the way that I prefer, but lots of designers do like it. Again, you begin with a slip knot on your hook, and since we're working in crochet, we begin with 2 chains. What we're going to do is work all of the stitches of our first round into this very first chain. It's like magic. It will expand for us because the slip knot is right here. The reason we have 2 chains here is that the second chain counts as the turning chain for single crochet. If you were working in half double crochet, you would begin with 3 chains, where the first chain would be the chain you work into for your first round, and the other 2 chains would be like your turning chain. For double crochet, you would begin with 4 chains, and so on. So we're working in single crochet. We insert the hook into the first chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, draw through 2 loops on your hook, and you'll notice that without trying anything and doing anything on purpose, the size of this first chain has already started to expand. That's the handy slip knot in action. Okay? So we're going to continue working single crochets into the very same chain. Just insert your hook again into the same place you did before. Pull up a loop, draw the yarn through 2 loops, okay? And this chain is going to keep expanding as we go around. And we can keep doing this for as many stitches as are required by our first round. Usually a first round begins with 6 or 8 stitches, sometimes 10 or 12. I rarely find a beginning row with more than 12 stitches. And then what's neat is that you can pull that slip-knot taut. Here, I'm going to remove the hook to make this clearer. Pull the tail, cinch that slip knot closed a bit, and you can really close up that hole in the middle of the ring. Now you don't want to use this technique to begin a granny square, because as we just said, you want the hole in the middle of a granny square. But you will often find this technique to begin things like hats, right? Where you don't really want a big gaping hole in the top of the hat. If you do end up with a bit of a hole in the top of a hat, that's where a pom-pom comes in handy. You can cover it up. Okay, and then I'm going to show you the last version, which is an adjustable ring. When I was introduced to this technique, the designer who taught it to me called it a magic adjustable ring. Oh, I'm making a slip knot, but we don't begin with a slip knot for this, because it's magic. Okay, here's what we do to begin making an adjustable ring. You loop the yarn around itself. That's it. We have a loop. Okay, I've got the yarn in back, the tail of the yarn. We insert the hook. This is the ring that we're going to make our stitches into. Insert the hook through the ring, yarn over, pull up a loop. This can be fiddly. This is the fiddliest way to begin crocheting in the round, but I also think it's one of the coolest ways to begin crocheting in the round. Okay, so remember, this is the ring. Now I'm going to chain 1. Things will start to behave a little bit more predictably now. Chain 1 for my turning chain. Even though we're not turning, we still call it a turning chain. It's kind of annoying. We insert the hook into the center of the ring, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Okay, and you can see this is fiddly. You can see that my work is moving around a lot more. My left hand is doing a lot of work here to keep everything stable. You'll also notice that I'm crocheting over the tail. Okay, so I've got the tail hanging down here. It's looped around the ring a little bit. That's okay, that's supposed to happen. I'm crocheting over it by inserting my hook into the center of the ring, and when I pull up a loop, everything's got twisted around a little bit. When I pull up a loop, I'm pulling the yarn around the ring and the tail, and that's okay. We're going to make a bunch of single crochets into the center of this ring. And again, any pattern that you're following will specify the number of stitches you want to use. Okay, now I'm going to count my stitches to see how many I have. Let's pull this hook out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is not 7. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to do 2 more. So I have 8 stitches in here, and then I'm going to show you how to close up the ring. 7 and 8. Okay. So now I have this tail here. I'm going to untangle it a little bit. Then I'm going to take a firm grasp of the stitches with my right hand, and I'm going to try not to squeeze the ring, because that'll defeat my purpose. So I'm going to hold the top of the stitches pretty well, and I'm going to pull the yarn tail. There I go, dropping everything. In fact, I might start holding from the end, and as I pull the yarn tail, everything is going to close up, and I'm going to tug it really tightly. And now there is no hole at the center of this ring. It's all closed up, and it's closed up quite securely, which is what we want if we're making something like a hat where we don't want a hole in the top, but especially when we're making things like dolls, where we're going to stuff it. We can't have big holes in toys when we're going to stuff them, or else the stuffing will pop out. So this is an especially useful technique if you're interested in making toys. Okay? Now, we're going to continue from here, because I already have this done. But the way to finish off a round of crochet is to slip stitch in the very first stitch from the round. And again, counting comes really in handy here to try to figure out exactly where that first stitch is. And especially in the first round, if you've used an adjustable ring and things are really tight in there, you want to make sure you're inserting your hook in the right place. It might be a tight first stitch after tightening everything up. That's normal and okay. So I'm just going to count back from where I've left off. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is good. I wanted 8 stitches. On this very first stitch, the one I just counted as number 8, I'm going to jam my hook right in under those 2 loops. I told you it's tight, so use your fingers, really work at it. And I'm going to make a slip stitch. So I'm going to pull the yarn through the loops of the stitch and through the loop on my hook. Okay, and I'm going to pull that out so you can see. Here we have the first round in a round of crochet. Now to continue working in the round in a flat circle, we need to increase every round by the same number of stitches that we began with. So in this example, we began with 8 stitches. That means we need to add 8 stitches on the next round. To do that, we need to increase 1 stitch in every stitch around. We began with 8 stitches, we need to end up with 16. The way you increase in crochet is very simple. You make 2 stitches in 1. Just like we inserted our hook into the center of the ring, in whichever technique that we use to begin crocheting in the round, we insert our hook into the same stitch twice to increase. Now I'm just making my turning chain here. Okay, here's my first stitch of the round. I'll insert my hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Now you know already from experience that this is the next stitch, but we're not moving on to the next stitch yet. We're going to make another stitch in the same stitch. An easy way to identify which stitch you've just worked into is to tug up on your hook. Okay, tension your yarn pretty tightly. When you tug up on your hook, the bottom of the stitch is going to pull up on the stitch that it was worked into. So as I tug up, you can see this is where I need to insert my hook again, into that same stitch that's being tugged up. And I've made 2 crochets, 2 single crochets into the same stitch. And it might be hard to see right now. That's okay. You'll gain an understanding of this as you go. So now I'm going to tug up again because I don't want to work into that stitch anymore. I've made my 2. So there's the tugging up stitch. I'm going to insert my stitch in the I'm going to insert my hook in the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, complete my single crochet, and I need to increase there. So I'll insert my hook in the same stitch again. So to increase in crochet, you simply make more than 1 stitch into the same place. You can increase by 2, like we're doing, or in some dramatic stitch patterns, you might increase by 3 or even 4. So keep working around by making 2 stitches in every stitch. By the end of the round, you should be able to count back and count 16 stitches total. Okay, then you just keep working around until you're at the end of the round. Something you might be noticing, especially with single crochet that's not a tall stitch, is that it can be hard to tell when you're approaching the end of the round, when you're working around. This is where stitch markers come really in handy. A split ring stitch marker is something like, it's often shaped a bit like a loop or a spiral, or even these kind of handy ones that are a little bit like how a safety pin works. You can use any of these to insert the marker into any stitch you'd like in your crochet work. This is handy because it won't come out. But when I work in the round, I especially like to use a really simple split ring split ring stitch marker, and I mark the last stitch of the round. Sometimes I mark the first stitch. This is just a reminder to myself that I'm approaching the end or the beginning of the round. So then as I work around in crochet and I'm increasing and increasing, I don't have to worry about accidentally blowing past the beginning of the round. And it helps in even with tall stitches, like with double crochet, just because it's a blatant reminder to myself not to forget, because I'm forgetful. And once you get into a groove, you might just enjoy doing the stitches so much that you're not quite noticing what's going on. The marker is this blatant reminder, hey, this is the last stitch of the round. And then to work into that stitch, you remove the marker, do your crocheting. If you're making an increase and you work 2 stitches into there, replace the marker in the last stitch you make. Okay? And then you can use that as a device to help you occasionally, maybe, make fewer mistakes. For me, I think it works about 50% of the time. Okay? So the math, it's all math, and it's simple math. To create a flat circle in the round, you increase in every round by the same number of stitches you started off with in the beginning. So for round 1, 8 stitches in this example. Round 2, a total of 16 stitches. In round 3, we have a total of 24 stitches, and those increases are going to be evenly spaced around. That means that in this round, for example right here, I increased. These 2 double crochet stitches right here between my fingers were made into the same stitch. You can see when I tug that up, here's the stitch they were made into. But the next stitch is just a single stitch. 2, 1, 2. Okay? And in the 4th round of this example, here's an increase. Okay, you can see right here, 2 stitches were made into 1. The next stitch is not an increase. The next is not an increase, but the one after that is an increase. Any pattern that you follow that involves working in the round will specify to you where the increases go and how many stitches you should have at the end of the round. So it should be pretty straightforward how to do it. But if you feel like just making a hat on your own, this is a pretty good way to figure out how to start. So that's what we have for working in circles in flat from the center out. If you want to make something like a cowl or a big circle scarf, what you want to do, you don't want a disc, you don't want to start from the center out. What you want to do is just create like a tube. And the way to begin to crochet a tube is very similar to the way you begin crocheting rows. Because to crochet a tube, you're essentially making rows that build up on each other. You're just connecting them into the round at the end of the round. So you begin, say, with a long chain, like this one. Obviously, if you're making a cowl, it will be even longer than this because it'll have to fit around your neck. And any pattern that you follow will tell you to start with a certain large number of chains. You might start with 100 chains or more. Okay? So stitch markers also come in handy if you're counting a really large number of chains. If you have to chain 100 or 200 chains, put stitch markers at even intervals along the chain so you don't have to keep going back to the beginning every time the phone rings or your child calls your name or you zone out and lose track. It's a pain to count 300 stitches over and over again until you're sure you have the right number. Instead, put a stitch marker every 10 or every 20 or every 50 so that you at least have those even ways of counting. Anyway, the way you join a chain to crochet in the round is the same way you do when we chained 6 chains together to make a small round, except you want to be careful not to twist the chain. The reason for that is to create a tube in crochet, you are not going to insert your hook into the center of this enormous ring like you do in the small ring to crochet from the center out, but you're going to insert your hook into the chain as if it's a foundation chain, like when we worked in rows. And if you do that and your chain is twisted, and you are always inserting your hook, say, into the spine bump, then what you're going to end up with is more like a Mobius strip, or an even more twisted strip than that. Now, if you want to make a Mobius, that's the way you make a Mobius. You put an intentional twist in your chain. But for now, You're going to see that it can be pretty tedious, but we're going to try. I'm going to demonstrate how to loop this around and use those spine bumps as a guide to myself. Oh, I did this backwards. I want my live loop on my hook side. Okay. So I'm going to twist this chain around, and this is fiddly, and it will be fiddly every time. And that's normal and okay. And you want to take the time to make sure you're doing it right so you don't drive yourself insane when you've gotten 12 rows into your cowl and you realize there's a twist in it. So what I've done here is I've laid the chain out so that all of the spine bumps are facing up. That's my clear notification to myself that we're on the right track. Then I'm going to do what I always end up doing by thinking I'm so clever. I'm going to insert my hook in and realize that the spine bumps can't face up when my hook is inserted into the chain. So then I'm going to try to just sort of make sure that as I go, all of the spine bumps are at least leaning toward the inside and not the outside. And I'm still confident that that's the case. And I'm going to insert my hook into the spine bump of the chain closest to the initial slip knot, and I'm going to make a slip stitch to join the two together. Ta-dam! Okay, now I have my chain. It is not twisted, and I'm ready to make my first round of stitches. So, say I'm making treble crochets, I do my 4 turning chains, 2 yarn overs, and insert my hook into the next spine bump. And then I go around from there, making regular treble crochets all the way around. And when I get to the end, I will again use a slip stitch to join the last treble crochet of the round to the top of the turning chain here. And I fiddly and insert my hook there to make the slip stitch. That'll be the end of my first round. Then I'll make a chain of 4 again to make my second round of treble crochets into the first round. That is an introduction to how to work in the round, how to increase and keep your crochet flat when you're working in a flat disc, and how to join a long chain into the round to make something like a cowl or the neckline of a sweater or even the cuff of a sleeve. Your homework is to practice crocheting in the round. Practice spacing your increases evenly around when you're making a disc. Practice what it's like when you don't distribute those increases evenly around. Does it create a kind of wonky shape? Get a feel for that. Intentionally make those kinds of mistakes so then you know what it's like and you're not so focused on getting it right all the time. So you can see how you might diagnose things. If things start to look wonky, you'll be able to easily identify that's because your increases aren't evenly spread around. Another thing to practice is making a long chain and joining it without twisting the chain to make a cowl. You can go nuts and make yourself a cowl, which is pretty fun. I don't know about you, but I wear them all the time. In our next lesson, we are going to learn how to follow a crochet pattern, which will enable you to make pretty much anything.